Hello, my name is Cody McCoy, and this is my Module 3 assignment for AEP 853. I conducted 3 interviews about special education. I interviewed 3 different people. The first was Melissa Veach. She's the assistant principal at Washington High School. And before this, she served as the assistant director of special education for USD 500. I interviewed Cheryl Palmer, who is a special education collab teacher, and Erin McGee, who's a paraeducator in our life skills classroom. As far as identifying students and child find procedures, Ms. Veach noted that they did screening at pre-K. Usually during kindergarten roundup, they would be screened by the school psychologist and the speech pathologist. And this is where the majority of IEPs come from. She said that there's a big gap in our district and in special education in general, that identifying older children or children that may have been missed at those screenings does not happen nearly as much as it should be. But parents can request an evaluation at any time, and sometimes this happens at the recommendation of teachers. They can, advise parents, that it's their right to have their child screened. Cheryl Palmer, referenced the Wyandotte County Co-op. She said that the co-op does walk-in screenings for parents. You can take your child in and get them screened. They can be referred to a SIT team or student improvement team. This is kind of the step before special ed, and that parents can request screening. She noted that in high school, the majority of students who are identified comes from a parent requesting screening. And then Aaron McGee, Mr. McGee wasn't really sure how this worked. He knew that the Wyandotte County Co-op handled it, but he wasn't completely sure on how students would be identified and how we would find out if students needed special education services. As far as the most challenging part, Miss Veach said that navigating laws was really challenging. Special education laws are very clear, and they have to be followed by every school. But she said that some have virtually no practical application, that sometimes these laws don't do what's best for the school, and sometimes that they really are good in theory but don't necessarily help students in the best way. She said the other thing from an administrator's perspective that's difficult is managing plan time for special education teachers. Having them be in enough classrooms and students receive all their minutes and get them the necessary plan time as negotiated with the union can be extremely difficult. Ms. Palmer said that the most challenging part was the workload. She said that it's very difficult for any one person to do the job. Between IEP meetings, data collection, there's just not enough hours in the day. She even recently took a work day where she got a substitute teacher and just wrote IEPs and collected data on students. She said that another issue that's really hard is being let down. This is a job where students don't always succeed, and sometimes they fail. And when that happens, it's very hard not to take that personally. It's very hard. It's very hard for teachers to not get discouraged. Mr. McGee stated that sometimes it's very difficult to get respect from your peers. Teachers want to treat paras poorly. They don't really understand how to use them. They often just think they're there to make copies and babysit, when really they are a valuable asset to the classroom and can really help your instruction. As far as the most rewarding part, Ms. Veach said brainstorming with an IEP team and being successful. When a student reaches their goals and when the team thinks about the student first and puts their best interest at heart and thinks about what they need and are successful, she said it's the best feeling she has in education. Miss Palmer echoed that. She said successful interventions are really the most rewarding part. She noted students sometimes enter high school at a first grade reading level, and that she said students who did that be able to be in a regular education setting for their English class and graduate on time. And she said there's nothing better than watching those students go across the stage. And Mr. McGee, it's interesting that he also cited student growth. Watching students grow and reach their life goals is very rewarding. In his situation, being in a life skills classroom, sometimes that looks very different. And even watching them exceed expectations can be very, very valuable and rewarding. As far as staff supervision, Ms. Veach says that administrators should be flexible. They should trust teachers to know the handbook, and that administrators themselves should know their handbook. And as a leader, you need to know the handbook as well. As administrators and educational leaders, we need to know the laws, and we need to know what goes into these IEPs and these meetings, and we need to be able to advise and reference it when we're working with the IEP team. Ms. Palmer stated that you need to trust your staff and empower them. You hired those people for a reason. You believe in them, and you did at one time, and so now it's time to trust them with their students' education. If there's an issue, not to call that person out in front of the student or the parent, but have that conversation in private and coach them and build them up as an individual. Mr. McGee would like to see paras more involved in educational decisions and feedback. Many times, paras spend the most time with a student one-on-one, and sometimes they are never asked what should be done when they may know the student better than anyone. As far as working with students, Ms. Veach says don't be afraid to lead. Be an advocate, especially if the kid's younger. If the student is younger, then it is your job, right, as an educational leader to make sure that that student is getting the services they're entitled to. You have to advocate for those kids, you have to speak with teachers, and you have to make sure that they are receiving their services. For older students, it's a little bit different. Yes, you have to make sure they're receiving their services, but your role changes. It's time for them to advocate for themselves. By the time they are in high school, they need to be asking for their accommodations. They need to be working with the IEP team for the accommodations that they need. Ms. Palmer says that it depends on the classroom. She cited that social studies is particularly difficult to co-teach, that she feels like when she's in a social studies class, she's mostly modifying and overseeing modifications. But she also says that math is easier. She feels like it's easier to take kids into small groups, and it's easier to work and to differentiate in a math classroom. Mr. McGee says, to communicate, to speak with the teacher and the students on a daily basis, give input on students' needs and their performance, and encourage teachers to push students, especially life skills students. He says that teachers often are afraid to push students from a life skills classroom as hard as they do other students because they are just unsure and they have less experience with those students. As far as working with parents, Ms. Veach says to empathize. Be empathetic with the parents. Many times, IEP meetings for parents and issues with their students' IEP and services is very stressful for them, and we need to keep that in mind and be cognizant of that. We should value their opinion. They are a member of the IEP team. They are not just a signature. They aren't just a bystander in the process. Their input matters. Even though we spend a lot of time with their kid, they are still the parent, and they know their child better than anyone. But as an administrator, your job also has to be to advocate for the school. You not only have to make sure that that student is getting the services that they need, but that we can provide those services without being a detriment to the learning environment of everybody else. Ms. Palmer says to listen and be flexible, work with parents. She said one big thing that helps her in working with parents is communicate the way that they want, right? Some parents want a phone call, some like to email, and some like to text message. Mr. McGee says to work on communication skills. He speaks with parents on a daily basis. He 3 students basically all day, and he communicates with those parents sometimes daily. With spending so much time with those kids, he feels like he should be speaking with those parents on a regular basis, and he does. As far as advice for administrators, Ms. Veach says to be flexible, but you also have to be an instructional leader. You have to encourage people to teach, and you have to be able to coach their instruction regardless of if it's in a life skills room or if it's in a collab class or even if it's in a direct service class. Be courageous to enforce policy. This can be a really tough job, but this is a job of an administrator in general, is you have to enforce policy, whether it's in a special education room or just in a regular classroom setting. And be inclusive. It's important that administrators are sensitive to special education, that they include them in the school's daily activities, and that we must model for the rest of the staff members what we expect. So we need to always use kid first language. The kid always comes before the disability, and sometimes this is a practice that gets put by the wayside by regular ed teachers, and that's just unacceptable. Ms. Palmer says to know the laws in litigation. Know what you're expecting of your IEP teams and know what they can and cannot do. She says to hold students with disabilities to a high standard, that many times they are held to a lower standard because of their disability and that this is a disservice to students. And she also says know who has an IEP and who their case manager is. This may be a little bit difficult, but it is doable. You need to be able to know when you see a student based on you knowing them and knowing their family if they have an IEP, and it's best if you can tell who the case manager is also. And Mr. McGee says that you should be loyal to your staff and appreciate your staff. They are the ones in the trenches. They are doing the work every single day, and if they feel appreciated, they will do so much more for you. This assignment was great. I had the opportunity to talk to 3 amazing educators, all at different points in their career and in different roles. I learned a lot. I learned more about the mindset of other educators, which was very eye-opening. And the most eye-opening part for me was that the most rewarding part for them was that it was all about student progress. And I think that that's a common theme throughout education. We all want what's best for students. And I think if we asked all teachers, most of them would say student progress would be the most rewarding part of their job. So with that in mind, that's all anybody wants, is they want our students to succeed. They want their students to be valued, and they want to see them grow. As a future administrator, I will use this information on a daily basis. Currently, Washington High School has about 20% of their population are students with disabilities or exceptionalities. And so every day you will encounter a student who has an IEP, and we need to know how to support them and show them that they are valued and help them in their educational process. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do apologize for a little bit of noise. I'm currently the administrator on duty at a baseball game, and so I'm doing my best, and I do apologize. Thank you very much. Have a good night.